The pen felt heavier than it should have. The paper in front of me, the neatly printed words, the cold legal jargon, everything blurred for a moment. I blinked, refocusing on the bold title at the top, Prenuptial Agreement. Across the table, Ethan, my fiancé of 3 years, tapped his fingers on the polished wood. His face was carefully composed. "It's just a precaution, Lorey," he said smoothly. "You understand, right? Just in case." Just in case. I forced a smile, though my stomach turned. "Sure," I said. "Just a backup plan." A backup plan for what, exactly? We had been together for 7 years, through college, through our first broke years in a tiny apartment, through building our lives together. Now, standing on the edge of our future, he was asking me to sign this document that made it clear he was planning for a life without me. I picked up the pen. My heart pounded. "Don't be emotional. Be smart." I signed. He exhaled, relieved, and reached for my hand. "Thank you, baby. I knew you'd understand." I just smiled back because what Ethan didn't know was that I had already seen his secret savings account. It started 2 weeks earlier. I had never snooped in Ethan's finances before. Why would I? We had always been open with each other. He had access to my accounts, my salary, my investments. We were a team. But that day, while searching for an email on his laptop, a notification popped up. A bank statement from an account I had never seen before. I shouldn't have clicked. I knew it was an invasion of privacy, but something, instinct, maybe, pushed me forward. And that's when I saw it. $150,000 in an account with only his name on it. My breath caught. This wasn't from his paycheck. This wasn't from our joint savings. This was hidden. A backup plan. For what? For who? The next few days I tried to push it from my mind. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe it was for a surprise honeymoon. Maybe he was saving for something big. But when I casually asked about our savings, he brushed it off. "You handle the money, babe?" "I don't even look at that stuff," he said, lying straight to my face. That was when I realized Ethan wasn't just planning for our life together. He was preparing for a life without me. And then, last night, he dropped the bombshell. "Lorey, I need you to sign a prenup. Just something simple." Simple. Just like that, he confirmed my worst fear. Now, as I sat across from him, the ink on the prenup still drying, I forced myself to stay calm. He had a backup plan? Fine, I'd make sure he needed it. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Ethan thought he had everything under control. He thought the prenup had locked me out of any financial security. But what he didn't realize was that he had just handed me the blueprint to my escape. And I was going to use it. I sat in my car outside the law office, gripping my coffee like a lifeline. The manila folder on the passenger seat contained everything. A copy of the prenup, bank statements, and screenshots of Ethan's secret savings account. I didn't even know what I wanted, not yet. Revenge? A way out? The truth? All I knew was that I needed answers. The receptionist led me into a sleek modern office where my lawyer, Mr. Carver, was already waiting. Late 50s, sharp eyes, the kind of man who had seen every possible way a relationship could fall apart. I slid the prenup across the desk. "I need you to explain exactly what this means for me." He skimmed through it, flipping pages with practiced ease. A few minutes later, he leaned back, tapping his pen against the contract. "Well," he said, "let me ask you something, Lorey." He met my eyes. "Are you sure he's the only one with a backup plan?" My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He smirked. "Your fiancé made one critical mistake. He wrote this prenup himself, or at least he drafted it, without the expertise of someone who truly knows what they're doing. That's what happens when men think they're smarter than they are." He flipped to a specific clause, tapping it with his pen. This contract is heavily in his favor, yes. If you divorce, you walk away with only what's in your personal bank account. No access to his money, his assets, nothing. I swallowed hard. I already knew that part. But Carver continued. He forgot to protect his hidden savings. I blinked. What? Look here, he said, pointing at the section regarding separate assets. In an airtight prenup, he would have disclosed all his accounts, assets, and properties up front. That's standard. But in this case, Ethan only listed the joint assets and his primary checking account. Realization hit me like a freight train. He had never disclosed the hidden account, which meant, legally, Carver grinned. If that money was earned during your relationship, and it isn't protected under the prenup, then guess what? He paused. It's fair game. I walked out of the office with my heart pounding. My fingers twitched to grab my phone and call Ethan, to demand an explanation, to throw his deception in his face. But I didn't. Because Ethan had played the long game, and now so would I. That night, I made dinner like nothing had changed. A warm, home-cooked meal, just like he liked. I kissed him on the cheek when he walked in. I smiled at his jokes. I played the part of the loving, clueless fiancé. But inside, I was calculating, watching, waiting. How many other secrets had he kept from me? Because men like Ethan don't just make one backup plan. They make several. And if I was going to make sure he needed that savings account, I needed to know exactly how deep his deception ran. The next day, I started looking through old bank statements, through his emails, through the cracks in the life we had built together. The more I searched, the worse it got. It started small, a few inconsistencies here and there, bank deposits that didn't match his paychecks, expenses that didn't add up. At first, I thought maybe he was just bad with money, maybe I was overreacting. But then I found the emails, and I realized Ethan wasn't just planning for a future without me. He was planning one with someone else. It was a Saturday morning when I finally found it. Ethan had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. I told myself I wouldn't snoop, that I had already found enough. But when I walked past and saw his inbox open, a single subject line stopped me cold. Looking forward to seeing you again soon. I stood frozen. The sender's name was Rebecca. I had never heard of her. I clicked, my hands shaking. The message was short, too casual, too familiar. Hey babe, I can't stop thinking about last weekend. I know we said we'd keep things slow, but it's getting harder to wait. A response from Ethan sat just below it. Me too, gorgeous. Just be patient a little longer. Things are almost in place. Almost in place. My stomach twisted, my head buzzed with white noise. I scrolled further, my breath catching with each new piece of evidence. Hotel bookings under his name, dinner reservations on nights he'd told me he was working late, payments to a jewelry store. I felt sick. Ethan wasn't just saving money to protect himself. He was preparing to replace me. I barely remember the next few hours. I went through every account, every statement, every digital breadcrumb he had left behind. And what I found made my blood turn to ice. The secret savings account? Not just for him. He was funneling money to her. The prenup? Not just for precaution. He was making sure I walked away with nothing. The engagement ring on my finger? Probably a placeholder until he could make a cleaner break. And the biggest betrayal of all, a lease agreement signed by Ethan for a condo with Rebecca. He had planned everything, the wedding, the honeymoon, the fake future with me. All of it was a stall because the moment things were in place, he was going to leave me. That night, I lay in bed next to him, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I had given this man 7 years, my trust, my love, my everything, and in return, he had built an escape route. I could have confronted him right then. I could have thrown my ring in his face, screamed, demanded answers. But that would have given him control. And if Ethan thought he was going to walk away from this untouched, he had another thing coming. Because now I wasn't just going to make sure he needed that secret account. I was going to make sure it was all he had left. Ethan thought he had everything under control. He thought I was clueless, that I would continue planning our wedding while he planned his escape, that I would never question the prenup or find his hidden life. He was wrong, and now I was going to make sure he regretted underestimating me. I spent the next week doing something I never thought I'd do, pretending. I played my role flawlessly, the devoted fiancé excited for the wedding. I kissed him goodbye in the mornings. I laughed at his jokes. I let him believe I was still in the dark. But the moment he left for work, I was in action. First, I visited a forensic accountant, someone my lawyer had recommended. I handed over the bank statements, the hidden account details, and everything I had found on his secret payments to Rebecca. "Can you track where the money is coming from?" I asked. The accountant nodded. "Absolutely. If he's been moving assets around in preparation for leaving you, we'll find it." Ethan thought he was covering his tracks, but what he didn't know was that I was already a step ahead. Next, I went to Rebecca's new condo. I wasn't reckless. I didn't go inside, didn't knock on the door. Instead, I waited, and sure enough, she arrived. She was exactly what I expected: pretty, young, naive, the type of woman who believed in sweet nothings and stolen glances, who thought that the man cheating on his fiancé would never do the same to her. She walked inside, oblivious, and I smiled, because if she thought she had won, she hadn't seen anything yet. That night, I set my trap. After dinner, I poured Ethan a glass of wine, his favorite. I let him relax, unwind. And then, casually, I said, "I was thinking, maybe we should move some of our savings into a joint account. You know, to prepare for the wedding." I watched his reaction carefully. His grip tightened around the glass for just a second, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. But he recovered quickly. "That's sweet, babe," he said smoothly. "But let's keep things the way they are. Just in case." There it was again. Just in case. I tilted my head, pretending to be curious. "In case of what?" He smiled, the same smile that had once made me trust him. "Oh, you know, life happens. Life happens." I fought the urge to laugh in his face, because he thought he was feeding me a lie, but in reality, he had just confirmed everything. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "Proceed with everything," I said. "Are you sure?" he asked. I had never been more sure of anything in my life, because Ethan didn't just betray me. He prepared for it. And now, I was preparing too. Ethan had no idea his perfect plan was falling apart. While he was busy sneaking around with Rebecca, preparing to leave me with nothing, I was pulling every string behind the scenes. And soon, his carefully built backup plan was going to be all he had left. The day everything started crumbling for him began like any other. Ethan kissed my cheek before leaving for work, oblivious to the fact that by sunset his entire world would come crashing down. I waited for the door to shut, counted to 10, then grabbed my phone. First call. My lawyer. "It's time," I said simply. He didn't need further instructions. We had already set everything in motion. At noon, I arrived at our bank. The teller greeted me warmly. She recognized me. After all, I had handled our forensics for years. "How can I help you today?" she asked. I slid a document across the counter. "I need to make some changes to our accounts." She glanced at the paperwork and froze. I could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She understood exactly what was happening. Divorce filings, asset separation. Ethan wouldn't know it yet, but as of this moment, our joint accounts were frozen. He wouldn't be able to move a single cent, not to Rebecca, not to his hidden savings, not anywhere. I smiled politely. And while we're at it, I'd like to remove Ethan Harrison as an authorized user on our credit cards. Step 2. The lease for Rebecca's condo. My lawyer had filed an official inquiry regarding Ethan's finances, including the undisclosed payments to her apartment. That alone wouldn't have been enough to destroy him, but the kicker? Ethan had used company funds for some of their little getaways. And that was corporate fraud. By the time he realized I was one step ahead, it was already too late. At exactly 3:45 p.m., I got the call. My forensic accountant's voice practically hummed with satisfaction. We found it. The money. Turns out, Ethan wasn't just saving for himself. He had been funneling company funds into that secret account, disguising them as business expenses. Illegal, traceable, and now reported. By the time Ethan got home that evening, I was already packed. I sat in the living room, calmly sipping wine, watching as he walked in, briefcase in hand, completely unaware that his life had just been set on fire. He smiled at me like everything was normal. "Hey, babe!" I set my glass down. "Hey, Ethan! How was work?" The moment he dropped his keys on the counter, his phone buzzed. Once, twice, again. I watched his face as he pulled it out and read the messages. I knew the first text was from his bank. "Your account has been frozen due to an official investigation. Please contact customer service." The second, from his employer. "Please report to HR immediately regarding financial discrepancies. Failure to respond will result in immediate termination." And the third, from Rebecca. "Ethan, what the hell is going on? I just got notice that the lease isn't getting paid. You said you had it covered. Call me now." I watched the blood drain from his face. Slowly, he looked up at me. "Lorey," I smiled, the same fake, sweet smile he had given me so many times. "Something wrong?" He swallowed hard. What did you do?" I tilted my head. "Me? Oh, nothing much." I stood, grabbed my overnight bag, and walked toward the door. "You know, Ethan," I said, pausing with my hand on the handle, "I used to wonder why you needed a backup plan." I turned to look at him, his face twisted in shock, in pure panic. "And now, I guess I finally understand." I stepped outside, closing the door softly behind me, leaving him alone in the house we once shared, with nothing but the mess he had created. Ethan had spent years preparing for a life without me. But now he was truly alone. His career ruined, his money gone, his future with Rebecca crumbling. And as for me, I was about to start the best chapter of my life. I thought Ethan would call, beg, try to explain, but instead, he did what all cowards do. He ran. In the days after I walked out, everything unraveled for him. His bank accounts, frozen. His job, gone. His reputation, destroyed. I didn't need to hear it from him. I heard it through thumb. For everyone else. His company didn't just fire him, they pressed charges. The forensic audit uncovered thousands in stolen funds, the same money he had been funneling into his secret account. Rebecca, she bailed the second as she realized Ethan was broke. She didn't even wait for him to explain. One moment, she was his future. The next, she had blocked his number. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office when he handed me the final piece of Ethan's downfall. "The lawsuit is official," Carver said, sliding a document across the table. "His former employer is demanding full restitution." I raised an eyebrow. "How much?" $150,000. I laughed. "Ethan's backup plan? It wasn't just all he had left. It wasn't even his anymore. The court seized the entire account to repay his debt. All his scheming, all his lies, they had led him straight into financial ruin. And me? I was finally free. I moved into my new apartment that weekend, a place I chose, I paid for. No shadows of Ethan, no reminders of betrayal. For the first time in years, I felt light. No more pretending. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just me, my future, and a clean slate. A month later, I ran into Ethan's sister. She looked at me carefully before saying, "You know, he told us you just up and left, that you abandoned him in his worst moment." I snorted. "Of course he did." She hesitated, then sighed. "But then we found out what he did, the secret account, Rebecca." I said nothing. She shook her head, almost pitying. "He's living with our parents now, no job, no savings. Mom and Dad aren't happy about it, but..." She trailed off. "But he's their son," I finished for her. She nodded. I smiled, feeling something unexpected. Indifference. Ethan wasn't my problem anymore. And the best part, he had done it to himself. That night, as I curled up with a book and a glass of wine, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I didn't have to check. I already knew who it was. Ethan. I let it ring. Then I blocked the number. The past belonged in the past. And I was already living the best revenge, a life without him.